And now Devin Soni, Melissa Albet, Mark Haidar, and Vitaly Golomb will be participating in a panel about the opportunities and challenges of the USA startup ecosystem. Paul Papadimitriou will be moderating this panel. Please welcome Paul once again.
Thank you. Me again, I'm so sorry, and I'm not American, so I'm not sure I can actually qualify for this panel. These guys, how many are we? So, yeah, you want to sit next to me? You're going to be very far, Mark, actually. So please don't mind me if I actually take my phone out. It's because I have notes from this panel. I'm not being antisocial or very rude with this panelist here. Although some people told me at some point in my career that I was sexist by doing that, I'll start with a lady. Can you please introduce yourself? Just 2 words.
Melissa Ablett with the Cambridge Innovation Center, CIC.
So you're based, oh, hold on. Where are you based?
We're headquartered in Boston, Cambridge.
Okay, that's one city. I just want to make sure everybody's actually from the US before I start. What about you?
Hi, my name is Devin Soni. I'm the co-founder of Sprayable Energy, and I'm based in San Francisco.
Vitaly, are you actually based somewhere else on a plane?
Yeah, I'm based mostly on planes. My name is Vitaly Golomb, founder of a company called Keen. We're in the print e-commerce space. I'm also founder of an organization called CCC. We're an entrepreneur education and venture fund for Central, Eastern Europe, and Middle East. And I'm mostly on a plane.
Mostly on the plane. Yeah, you beat me, actually. I used to be...
When I'm not on a plane, I'm mostly in San Francisco Bay Area. Ukrainian born, raised in the Bay Area.
Mark Haidar, co-founder of Dialexa Labs, and Vinley, and we're based in Dallas, Texas.
So what I see here is actually, besides you, Devin, they're all based in cities in the US. So by the way, I'm not based in the US, I'm based in London, so I'm really the outlier here. All based in cities. Usually when people talk about startups and ecosystems in the US, they talk about mostly San Francisco Bay Area, sometimes New York. There's a few spots, obviously Boston as a few mentioned, sometimes Boulder, but Dallas. Why Dallas?
Well, it's really interesting. First of all, the U.S. is way bigger than Lebanon, so in terms of size. It's literally as big as a continent. It's huge. Just Texas alone is bigger than France. So the U.S. is just a very diverse country. Just literally very different. A lot of differences between state and state. To your question, why Dallas? First, Silicon Valley is not the only place where you can do things. For example, if you look at Dallas, we have a lot of advantages just by being in Dallas rather than being in the Valley. First of all, we have some of the highest concentration of Fortune 100 companies in Dallas. We have really highly talented people, of which we can get for literally 50% of the salary that you would pay in the Silicon Valley, which gives us a huge advantage over the Valley. And also, there's way less noise in Dallas. A lot of people think, we always read the success stories in the Valley. People don't see that most of the companies in Silicon Valley actually fail. And we only see these 5 or 6 companies that actually make it. So there's a lot of companies in the Silicon Valley and a lot of noise and a lot of competition. In Dallas, we have less of that. So,
talking about very low salaries, is that why you're active in Eastern Europe besides being born in Ukraine, Vitaly? Well, I was in Romania yesterday, and that was not a bad comment about Eastern Europe, but I see a lot of even US startups, and maybe you can tell us a bit more about that actually use Eastern Europe as a kind of a back end because of the cheap salaries while at the same time having very high quality of engineers.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at US, there's a lot of different markets. Silicon Valley is #1. It's the most mature ecosystem, since mid-50s, Stanford-driven, Department of Defense-driven, lots of very interesting history there. Other parts of US have their own unique things. So if you want to make movies, you move to Hollywood. Can you make movies other places? Sure. It's a lot easier. The ecosystem is complete in Southern California. As far as startups, if you want to be in entertainment startups, LA is probably a better place than San Francisco Bay Area. If you want to be in financial technology or advertising, New York. Dallas, I don't know, maybe an oil startup, oil and gas startup, if those things exist. As far as...
They do, actually, they do.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes. So, as far as Eastern Europe, yeah, I mean, I have an advantage, obviously, Ukrainian-born. companies that are smart and are resourceful, they can actually go and establish a second office. So all of our engineering, most of our companies actually in Kyiv, Ukraine, which is actually not the cheapest place to find development talent. They're a little bit spoiled. There is a lot of outsource. They make 4 or 5 times more than lawyers and doctors, and they live quite well, relatively speaking. But it's still 1/3 the cost of equal talent and experience that you'd find Bay Area. And actually in Bay Area, it's a very, very bad thing. Everybody kind of laughs it off, but there's not enough technical talent. The large companies have to raise a lot more money and bludgeon each other to death. A starting salary for a good junior developer is $110,000, $120,000, and it's unaffordable for small companies. And it actually inflates everything. The cost of living is inflated. The cost of everything is inflated because these salaries go up. And the risk, all the valuations are higher because of that. Companies need to raise more money. And Silicon Valley companies are actually 20, 30% higher valuations than even New York, right? So you don't have to look that far. And what's interesting for us with the fund that we started is we're looking at Central Eastern Europe and Middle East because the entry valuations for these early companies is actually 3, 4, 5 times cheaper than in Silicon Valley, right? For maybe the same quality talent, interesting opportunities, less competition, same needs, newer markets, and ultimately we can make them look like Silicon Valley companies and value them a lot higher in the next round, right? So it's a little bit selfish.
Yeah, it's fine.
I sort of have this mixed experience. I lived in Silicon Valley pretty much my whole life, and also spent many years sort of working in venture capital in Eastern Europe. But eventually, the eventual reason I left venture capital in Eastern Europe is that there is no. The fundraising market sucks, and the exit market sucks. So starting a company is much harder, and exiting company is near impossible unless you create some, contrivance that makes you feel like a Silicon Valley company by hiring a sales rep in an office and being a Delaware C Corp and all this stuff. Which is, at the end of the day, total BS, right? It's how many, $10 billion companies have come out of Europe as a continent versus, Silicon Valley as a zip code. Probably order, 10x order of magnitude, and there's a reason for that, right? The 2 things that are great, the 3 things that are great about Silicon Valley is one, it's a lot easier to raise money because the center of capital is there. There's hundreds, if not thousands, of venture capital funds next door to you. Secondly, it's probably the only place in the world where you can actually kind of sit in a Starbucks somewhere and actually learn something. I literally spend a day a week sitting in coffee shops and kind of eavesdropping on conversations of people that are doing things that are way more interesting than I'm doing, and I generally take notes and learn things and implement them in my business. In technology, it doesn't happen that much in other places. So,
Do you learn stuff in Starbucks in Boston?
What was that?
Do you learn stuff at Starbucks in Boston?
Yeah, I think you do. The East Coast, West Coast conversation has always been a thing. And I think pretty recently in Boston, probably even just in the past 6, 7 years, that city as a city has really developed as a place where you can go into the right Starbucks and hear people talking about startups and innovation and entrepreneurs and investors mixing. And I think the West Coast is, really unique in that it is this fully developed, absolutely saturated, awesome ecosystem. I think the CIC in Boston and Cambridge has been very lucky because we grew there because there were the core building blocks that entrepreneurs need anywhere. So we boil that down to money, ideas, and talent. Those 3 things in any place can be enough to help talented entrepreneurs grow companies. And really good entrepreneurs will find those pretty much anywhere. So whether they exist in hordes or it's a little bit harder to find, I think with a little bit of visibility and pulling things together, that happens. So yes, that has been happening and kind of continued in Boston. And to kind of expand or maybe add on or disagree slightly to the San Fran is the place thing. I think it can happen in places across the US.
Yeah, but then again, sorry, you'll all have a shot at that, but follow the money. If you follow the money, I'm on Devan's part here because actually, let's talk about CCC for a second, the model you are creating. So you're going to be active in the CEE, so Eastern Europe region, and the Middle East, right? Am I correct? Right.
Yep. Well,
and are you not, if I understand the model correctly, and I've just heard about it yesterday from one of your partners, Max Gurvitz, you are trying to actually bring some of these, and you hinted at this, bring of these startups back to basically the Bay Area. So what I'm hearing here is like somebody's talked about less competition, somebody talked about the fact that it's cheaper, and somebody talked about that. But at the end of the day, don't you all want to bring the resources back because that's where you win, in San Francisco?
Well,
In
okay,
the Bay, sorry.
so past performance is not an indicator of future performance, right? So just because it's hard or the ecosystem's not mature yet doesn't mean that it's not worth developing. 80% of the middle class that's going to come in the next 10, 20 years is outside of the US, right? It's
Agreed.
the rest of the world. And the rest of the world needs a lot of things. And you look at, well, let's say Boston used to be number 2 in the first wave, now it's number 7, sorry. As
But
far
we're
as
still number
ecosystems
one
in the
in
US.
venture capital per capita, right?
Well, so there was Quatra, a company that became iAds that Apple bought, $400 million exit. Andy Miller, who became a VC at Highland, he was telling me that they were really trying to stay in Boston and couldn't. They ended up moving to Silicon Valley. So what we're
Even Highland moved to Silicon Valley.
well, yeah, exactly.
Devon, put your mic closer because nobody can hear
So
you.
there we go. So with CCC, what we're trying to do is actually create a bridge to Silicon Valley. And it doesn't mean moving companies to Silicon Valley. It means bringing mentors to this region, people with experience that can come and actually teach. And a big part of what we do, we consider ourselves a fund and an entrepreneur education program. We're doing 10-country tour with some great speakers early next year because we want to bring that kind of talent and bring those folks to the area so entrepreneurs in the audience and would-be entrepreneurs can be inspired and learn from that experience. You can't learn that in a traditional college, traditional MBA program. You can only learn it from experience. And all of that needs to come to these areas. And it wasn't born in Silicon Valley. It came there over many, many years.
So I'm going to try you, Mark, because Mark, you said Dallas, right?
Yep.
Did you have the right building blocks as well? Did you have these building blocks to be able to, or did you have to? Did you have any ecosystem when you started?
Yeah, so absolutely. So here's the thing. I mean, there's no doubt that Silicon Valley is, the best place to be. Probably, if you can't actually be in a Silicon Valley, start your company in Silicon Valley, get funding in the Silicon Valley. There's no doubt. It's great. The problem is 99% of the world cannot be there, cannot start their company there, cannot actually get funded there. So the question is that can you do it outside the Silicon Valley or not? And yes, you can. Because especially at the beginning, because the most important things in the startup, especially the first year, is in addition to having a great idea and a great product, is human capital, is actually having an actually great team. That's why you start seeing, for example, in Boston, they have MIT, Harvard right next to each other. If you go just walk into the Cambridge Innovation Center, I mean, you're going to see hundreds of companies over there, 60 events taking place every single day, a month in one small building. So there's a lot of resources that you can actually do, and you can do is at least start your company and get it to a certain level outside the Silicon Valley. The question is that after you build your product, build your team, how do you take it to kind of the next Uber, right? You get like funding 20 million, 50 million, 100 million. And this is where the Valley plays a really huge important role because if you just go and walk in Sand Hill Road and you just see Sequoia, Red Point, all these, I mean, it's just literally in one building. You can just do one day and you just see all these venture capitals over there. In addition to that, in addition to just the VC, because you can probably get it outside as well, is this PR and marketing machine that you have in the Valley. It's huge, just being in there, you're going to meet all the reporters, marketers, all the influencers in there. And this is the networking effect, the ripple effect of just letting people know about you with really minimal amount of marketing is huge. So the question is that what do you do? How do you bridge that gap, right? How do you actually leverage the advantages of being outside the Valley, of having cheaper resources, highly talented people, less competition, and then when you get to the level where you can be there, how do you get there, right? And this is where you start doing it, and I think this is relevant to startups here in Lebanon because even though I'm in Dallas, but and people complain, oh, this is not a Silicon Valley, but still Dallas itself is larger than just DFW area is larger than Lebanon. Boston, it's huge. You have MIT, and even to complain about we don't have much money, there's still a lot of VCs in there. So how do you do and go and to people in Lebanon and in the region to actually go and launch their companies in there? And this is where it becomes a way bigger challenge than a company like us in Dallas or a company in Boston. And so this is where probably I would like just to gear the conversation around.
I'll stay with you just for a second. it's the second time you mentioned less competition, which is probably true. But is it not actually a disservice to startups if you start in an environment where there's less competition, you actually probably go longer while you might have been killed if you were in another more ruthless environment?
I don't think it's competition so much as I think it's very powerful for entrepreneurs and startups to be in an environment where they can see other people doing the things that they need to do. So I don't think competition is necessarily good, but being able to see other CEOs raising, being able to see how they're hiring and how they're acquiring talent, I think that's good. I think in the war on talent, being in a market where you can easily find and retain top talent is worth more than being in a place where you're, constantly fighting off the competition.
I disagree completely.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, I think there's two types of talent, right? There's, young kind of junior engineers that, do the coding, and then there's, engineering managers. There's people that have grown companies from 0 to 10 employees, 10 to 100 employees, and 100 to 10,000 employees. And if you want to just start a company without worrying about, succeeding as a company, it may just be as easy in other places. But if you want to grow a Google-sized company or a $100 million or $1 billion company, you're not going to be able to do it in places where that latent managerial talent does not exist. And that's the other thing I found in Europe, right? It's fantastic to hire junior coders. It's next to impossible to hire a VP of sales.
I was about exactly to say that, because I used to live in the Philippines, as hinted earlier, and that was in a different setting probably, but what I saw is that the great talent, they actually leave. So the great talent doesn't stay in the city, whichever emerging country or city. I don't know if it's the case for Lebanon, I don't have any data on it, but I would see, and I don't know if it's still happening, this is a question for all of you guys, if I am someone that good, why would I stay? I could have a family, there's always reasons, right? And we know that Lebanese as Greeks, they like to stay home because they love their country. But at one point, if I have a huge opportunity in the Bay Area, I would leave, meaning that the ecosystem back home has good talent, but the greatest are already left. Is it something you're seeing?
I think at the beginning, when you start a company, it's just the first thing you don't have money, you don't have anything. You're just looking for anything that help you survive. And usually people survive better in environments that they're familiar with. If you're here in Lebanon, your network is in Lebanon, the people you know are in Lebanon. So it's really much easier to start a company in a place that you're more familiar with than taking a risk. Okay, I'm just going to go and book a flight to the Silicon Valley and do it. But the thing is that if you look at it just in terms of ecosystems, there are countries that actually have been successful in creating companies and technology and local ecosystem, and grow the company to a level and then bring it to the United States, like Israel, So if you look like Waze, right, this is a great example you can look at. You look at just the economy of Israel internally, it cannot support really growth company and make a company worth multi-billion-dollar company. But they created an ecosystem internally that helps you start the company and helps you build the company and help you validate and reduce that technical and market risk. And then at the same time, in parallel, while you're growing that company, they have these bridges to the United States. So when you get to a certain level, you can actually link you to VCs in the United States, and then they take you there.
This is a bit what you're trying to do, actually, Vitaly. You're trying to bridge, to find these nascent ecosystems, these nascent startups, might just not be at the ID stage, and actually to build them up, to help them actually mentor and you. But the interesting part, you can answer to that one, but the interesting part, I think, is that I've been seeing ecosystems for like 6-7 years, and they all boast that they're the greatest and they're the funnest, and they're going to be the next Silicon Valley, blah, 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 blah. And sometimes you look 7 years later and they haven't really moved a lot. And I think it's because, and that's why I think you are on something probably good, and I hope you succeed, not only because you're a friend, because I think it's smart, is that starting from the below point is the most important thing. And if you don't have a community, if you don't create these kind of bridges at the very early stage, then you don't go anywhere. You just have like announcements, and you're like, oh, we're going to be the next Silicon Valley, and here's a huge building for a new co-working space. Is that a bit what you're doing? Because you're giving...
Okay, so my personal opinion is, company headquarters should be the closest to its customers, right? So if you're serving, Middle East, Southeast Asia, wherever, you need to be there. Your sales and marketing organization needs to be there. Maybe you need to recruit somebody, like you're saying, it's hard to find VP of sales. Well, bring somebody there. Uber has an organization here, and they're focused on this area. So, you know, in today's world, for somebody to be lazy and think, well, we're just going to move and we're going to be in one place, you're not going to build a very big company. If you want to go after very interesting, fast-growing markets, you have to be very close to the customers. What does Silicon Valley have that is the unique and special thing? That's the experience and knowledge. And you can gain that, and you can bring it back with you. And that's the bridge we're trying to create with CCC, is to actually create the bridge of knowledge. And what does that mean? That means that the founders of these companies, or would-be founders, need to come and absorb the magic of Silicon Valley. It could be a week, it could be 2 weeks, it could be a month, but they need to bring it back with them to where they live, where they plan to operate, where they plan to start run their business and be close to their customers, and pick up some of those tactics and use that and be smart about it. And that's the magic that we're trying to bring. And a lot of that means bringing, you know, a lot of expats, right? So for example, I've been trying to bring a friend of mine, Jan Koum, started a little company called WhatsApp. He's Ukrainian born as well, and trying to bring him, you know, to inspire Ukrainians, or Max from PayPal, Max Levchin, also Ukrainian born. So it's very important for people that understand the culture and have had success elsewhere in the world to come back and give back. And actually, I'll be talking about that a little bit later today as well.
Melissa, I want to hear about it because you mentioned earlier when we were discussing that now you're expanding beyond Boston, right? So is it also some type of bridge you're trying to create? And can you tell us the cities you're expanding in?
Yeah, so we have 5 facilities in Boston and Cambridge. We just opened a city in St. Louis, Missouri, which is in smack dab the middle of the US. And for a lot of people, they would say, why St. Louis? It does not come to mind as an innovation city for a lot of Americans. But going back to kind of the building blocks elements, where you see an incredibly strong university presence there between 2 or 3 very strong universities, there's a lot of wealth there. So future angel investors that need to be catalyzed, but there are also investors in the area, and a lot of great talent and ideas. So looking...
You say catalyze. How do you catalyze? What do you
do? Catalyze? Well, I was speaking with someone here as well.
Maybe.
Right. You have these places in the world where St. Louis is the 2nd wealthiest city in the US in passive wealth. So a lot of old money. And how do you educate that population to become angel investors as a way to try and help jumpstart and put more investment into an ecosystem for the people who want to stay in St. Louis and grow a company in St. Louis? And I'm not an expert on this, so I don't know entirely how that's done, but I think more and more people are thinking about this, and I think it can be a powerful tool in different places. Also, going back to kind of the venture capital discussion before, I don't know, I think you hear more that it's a deal flow issue outside of San Fran, Silicon Valley, and less of a amount of money issue. I could be wrong there, but I think that's another thing to have in the equation. And then to continue answering your question, we're also working on expanding into the Netherlands right now. And as a similar country where there's Amsterdam with a lot of creative activity, there's Rotterdam, which is the 2nd largest city, incredibly connected, Europe's largest port, in a region that's the Randstad with 7 million people and a ton of great talent and great ideas. We see potential in all of these places to bring these things together and catalyze them into something.
Well, I want to pick up on something Mark hinted at earlier. He said that at some point at scale, you need to go probably to the Bay Area because you need the massive amount of money that you might not be able to get in smaller emerging cities. But that brings the question that maybe Vitaly, maybe you also have an opinion about, and we're seeing some hints, is that shouldn't these VCs start also, should they start investing abroad as well, or in other cities? Are they limiting themselves? I understand why they do it. You want to be close. This is an open question. I'm not trying to direct it. We see that 500 startups, it's more of an early stage, but 500 startups, Dave McClure is traveling all around the world. You're a mentor there. But it's still an outlier. Most of the big VCs will actually invest only in the Silicon Valley or very close to.
I'll tell you why, because we talk to VCs all the time, and actually, one of the most recent companies, because what we do is that actually we build products, we assemble teams, and then we go and look for Series A. So we complete the skip seed stage, and we just look for rounds for $5 million and up through our accelerator. So what happens that, you start needing to actually go and raise money. So we've been talking to a lot of VCs in there, and all of them, they ask me like, would you move to the Silicon Valley, right? And the reason is, my answer would be, is like, I don't care if I have to be in Congo Republic or Eskimo in order to go and start a company. I'll live there. I'll do it if this is good for the business, but I'm not going to move there, so I'm just close near you. So their answer is, the first part is that most of the companies that would acquire you, they're usually in the Silicon Valley. So that's the first part. It's very important.
The route of exit.
Yeah. So what happens that in order to get acquired from a company, it doesn't happen like you become successful and someone is going to send you an email, I'm going to acquire you. No, this is a process. It takes a couple of years. You align yourself with the acquirer. You make sure you match your model, your vision, the strategy, and all of that, and then you acquire. And most of the companies, in order to do it, you need to be logistically available on the ground, building these relationships. So this is a huge part in addition just to investment. The second part is the network effect, like the people, the sheer amount of companies that you actually have there, and the people you can access them. I mean, you'll be sitting in Starbucks there, and you can meet a lot of influential people just by being there without, arranging a Skype call or time zone differences or any of that. So there's a huge aspect of it, and that helps the growth, right, of your company. So it's not just for the money aspect. It's actually for, growth, marketing, and at the same time, acquisition.
Vitaly, you agree with that?
Well, okay, so you're kind of going towards the angle of build to flip, right? Yeah. Build to sell. Yeah. But in Silicon Valley VCs are kind of lazy, right? That's one way to look at it. The other way to look at it is good investors invest in things that they know deeply, right? So to be able to invest in other regions, you have to know that region very, very well, very deeply. And most Silicon Valley investors are looking at global plays. They're looking at building billion-dollar companies that will operate worldwide, but from a Silicon Valley base, right? If you look at, London has in the last 2 years, has proven that it's possible to build very large companies outside of Silicon Valley in this wave, right? And there's always different cycles of venture capital. So, like I said, like Boston was a very big player in the late 90s in the first dot-com wave. So that's really it, and in these investors in Silicon Valley, they think we're going to build global companies, all the resources are here, everything's here, but it's also kind of Hunger Games, right? Silicon Valley is like the Olympics of startups. The best and the brightest come to Silicon Valley, and it's very, very difficult. So, my advice always to European entrepreneurs especially is, come learn and then bring that knowledge home, practice where it's a little bit easier to compete. And then maybe, one day go and build a global company out of Silicon Valley. Maybe you can do it, from wherever.
Before I give you have also to think, if I'm a VC based in San Francisco, of course, first, I might want to have the company close to me, but also, let's be honest, investing in some random countries where the regulatory conditions might not be completely clear or the political instability might not be completely also given, it's actually not really easy. And I have a lot of deal flow at home. So, I can also understand, I agree that some of them might be lazy, but at the same time, have a huge deal flow by not moving, and I don't want to step into, countries, like you said, that I don't know, but also that might not be maybe, safe enough from my point of view.
On the surface, right? So
I agree.
It's kind of it's an ongoing joke. If people say, well, we're lazy, we want to be within an hour of our company so we can go to meetings, to board meetings, but that's not really true. That's just kind of a going joke. Really the root of it is that it is scary for somebody to invest in a region they haven't spent any time in or very little time in because they don't understand all the risks, right?
So sorry to interrupt you. You're raising a fund. Have you a hard time finding LPs in the US? Do they resist, or is it possible?
No, we're talking specifically to companies that have an interest in the region, right? As LPs, as investors into our fund. They have a specific interest, specific connection to the region. We wouldn't go to a random, retirement fund in the US for them to look at investing in Central Eastern Europe, because it's not part of their mandate, it's not part of their portfolio strategy. This is not accidental, this is not about salesmanship, it's about major trends and where funds get allocated, and these decisions are made well before we approach these investors, right?
Devin? I assume you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I do. So I think when you're investors, you have different types of risk, right? And you want to minimize risk. That's kind of your job as an investor. There's business model risk, there's team risk. Those things are sort of a given, but there's also sector risk, and there's like geographic risk, which is the big one. So you want to minimize risk, and you minimize risk by doing things you know, and that just means that unless you de-risk other parts of the business in a better way by having a rock star team, lots of traction and revenue, you're very likely not going to want to take that geographic risk unless you need to.
One thing that you guys hinted at as well, you did that earlier, is that maybe models can be completely different depending on the location and place. London, the one you mentioned, is actually not copycatting the Silicon Valley model at all, but it's found a different way. If you look at stuff that we don't hear a lot about because usually it's not B2C, but you see a lot of biotech, you see universities like in Switzerland next to the big engineering schools, you have a lot of fascinating stuff going on that are being acquired by B2B companies. That's why we never hear about it on TechCrunch. No disrespect to Mike here, but so there are other models. So is that something that, for instance, you, Melissa, when you work in Boston, because we keep referring to the Bay Area, obviously, but do we need to actually copy whatever they do? I mean, besides the building blocks you mentioned, are there other ways? Because this is exactly what here these guys are doing. And I go to all these emerging countries, there's Eastern Europe, Southeast Asia, Brazil, and they all train differently, and it kind of seems to be working. Some are failing, so please.
Yeah, I think you have to work with what are the quote-unquote natural resources of an area. And I think any city, any innovation district who claims or wants to be the next Silicon Valley, you have lost before you've even started.
It's usually a politician who says that, right?
So don't say it. I mean, for instance, Boston and Cambridge, I think a lot of it stems from universities and what the universities are strong in. I think the startups you meet there are very different than some of the startups you meet on the West Coast. There's much more of a life sciences focus. There's Sanofi, Novartis, Genzyme, they're all there, and that's driving a really powerful cluster that's very different than other cities. In St. Louis, for example, the influence of Boeing there is big, and there's more of a focus in even different industries. So I think you need to look at what's happening in any given place and work with that. Find people who want to invest money in that. Find smart people who want to be a part of that. And it may never reach the size or scale of Silicon Valley, and that's okay, but you can still have a really meaningful, powerful innovation cluster that's driving good economic growth for your region.
One of the things that I've seen that really, and Vitaly hit the right nail there, that I've seen working a lot is bringing back people, or sometimes not back because they might have been actually born in the US, but bringing people from a community, from a country, from a city, there when they have been successful to bring them back. I think that's something that you mentioned, I don't know if you mentioned the term emulation, but you want to prove to people here in Lebanon, and you have a big diaspora, you want to prove people like, hey, it's possible, I've made it, and I'm here to inspire you, I'm here to probably maybe teach you, I'm here to actually mentor you, advise you, and that's something very important, but I see in some cultures, and this is where I want to hear maybe you, Vitaly, some cultures, some people are more resistant about doing that, because when they it's a lot of that in emerging countries, because usually when you succeed in emerging countries is despite the conditions, not because somebody helped you. So when you succeed, you become very individualistic. You say, you know what, nobody helped me, so it's very hard to kind of bring back that version of pay it forward and, hey, please come back and help us. No, because nobody helped me back then, I don't need it to do it. I've succeeded on my own and I live in the US. So do you have a hard time, and let's not talk about your friend Cancun, but you have a hard time finding people for all these places you're going to hit, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, etc.
Well, I think you're right, but people need to kind of resist that. It's very easy to kind of fall into that and say, well, nobody helped me, I did it all by myself. But in reality, to build a healthy ecosystem, people have to give back, right? And when we try to do this, like I spent a lot of time in Ukraine, I have another office in Ukraine, I was born there, and I understand the culture, I'm kind of a bridge. So kind of a unique, interesting perspective there. And I've seen, these things that kind of make me laugh a little bit. People are trying to own the startup ecosystem. It's my thing, don't put on conferences, it's competition. When in reality, everybody needs to work together to make it much bigger than they can on their own. And it's probably the most important thing for people to come back and provide this knowledge and help each other, mentor each other. That's really what makes Silicon Valley special. You have 6 generations of tech entrepreneurs that gladly help the next generation. And this is knowledge you cannot get in a textbook. This is experience that has to be passed on. It's like an apprenticeship business, both on the investment side and on the entrepreneur side. And without it, it's not going to work. It's just not going to work.
Evan, would you consider, because you lived in Europe, right?
I did, and I think it's really easy to have a lot of optimism about people being willing to jump on planes and give back to their sort of like local economies and things like that. But I haven't really seen many specific examples of that working very, very well, or B, people the best of intentions, but I think it's much easier to nurture companies when they're in your backyard, because you can meet people for coffee, or there's less of a barrier, right? So if I had some sort of interesting good information and the person I wanted to tell it to was sitting next to me, it'd be much easier to do that and distill that than if I have to jump on a plane and do it once a quarter. I think like things just get lost in translation and lost in time, that you lose a little bit.
Yeah, but I mean, I think that effort has to be made, but it's going to be made by people that have a connection to that region, right? So it's people that somehow ended up, my family moved me to Silicon Valley when I was 8 years old, and I grew up in Silicon Valley, but I still have that cultural connection, still spoke Russian at home, and I still feel, very connected to the region, so I'm motivated for whatever irrational reasons to come back and provide that knowledge. And yes, you're absolutely right. Most people probably won't do that, but enough people will to where it will, slowly trickle in. Can it be more efficient? Sure. Can you put more people and, try to motivate and pay people and whatever? Sure. Lebanese government announced a $400 million going into startups. Well, it shouldn't be in investment capital. There's not enough deal flow of Lebanese companies to invest that much money, but it should go into funds. It should go into hiring people with knowledge to motivate them. If need be, just hire them, bring them here, consultants that will share that information.
Actually, I couldn't agree more. And just take Lebanon just for relevance of the conference. If you look at Lebanon just by itself, I don't know if you guys knew that, but 75% of the population of the country actually lives outside Lebanon. And if you guys been outside Lebanon, you meet Lebanese, they're all successful entrepreneurs, very good in sales, marketing, and really good technical background. So what happened is that for me personally, I'm originally from Lebanon, so I grew up here and I left in 2006 and made it in the United States, and now I want to give back. And what we did is I looked at BDL Accelerate, and you start seeing $400 million. It's like, just for the economy, I think compared to the United States, it's as if the US government put, say, almost like, $400 billion, from the government to fund startups. Huge. So this is really huge for the economy here. But the problem is still the education part, understanding how to build a company that could scale. There's no reference here in Lebanon. You don't know, you haven't seen, it's not like your friend or your neighbor have started a company and grew it to a multi-billion-dollar company. And you actually have that experience, you see that. And a lot of Lebanese outside actually have done it. So what I wanted to do, what I did, I created an association called LISA, which is the Levant International Startups Association, and it does exactly this. It's basically help starting with the Lebanese universities to actually start educating people, actually getting speakers from outside, from the United States to talk to students here, and at the same time help them with PR, marketing, communication, work closely with the BDL Accelerate, and when it's at level where it is financeable, or if a company that can actually grow in the United States, help them to go there. And to prove the point is that basically would people do it? No, most of people probably won't. But you're going to find this 100 or 200, 300 people who are so passionate about it, and they would love to help people in there. And this is what we're doing. And just in a matter of a couple of months, we have around 52 people who are actually willing to work at advising, mentoring, and all, and we haven't started yet. So it is hard, but there are people who do it, and I think it is definitely possible.
You need a framework, that's why you do it. Usually you just need to ask, actually. People will not think on their own. It's not exactly the same culture, but we have a similar culture in Greece, and I see exactly the same dynamics. There's a lot of people living abroad, and they also, you have to grab them, but they will actually end up doing it. So it actually
I think the key word you said is passion, right? So entrepreneurship is, you have to be crazy to do this. The odds of success are very low. There are much easier ways of making money, much easier ways, much more secure ways of building a career than starting a company. But people are passionate about a particular problem, they want to solve it, and it's that same attitude that you need to actually have people come back and be passionate about giving back.
I agree. One other thing you just mentioned, and this is not a shot against our host here, but what I see as well is we often see, I mean, this is a very good initiative, so that we don't see that often, actually, no. But we see governments actually putting money in the system to help startups, to help the ecosystem. But what we fail to see a lot of times, actually the other end of the flow is that, yeah, it's great to have money, but to make an ecosystem work, everybody has to make money, basically. The entrepreneur has to make money, the VC has to make money, and the LP has to make money. And for that, you have to have the path to exit. IPO is probably never going to happen in the foreseeable future in a country like Lebanon, and that's fine. But you have to also create a framework, a regulatory framework about hiring practice, so labor laws, about banking, about everything that goes around the fact that creating a new business, and also actually making it easy to people to make money. If you have money at the start, but then it gets bottlenecked, that's the hard part. I don't know the situation in Lebanon, so I'm not taking a shot at anyone here, so please don't flame me. But I've seen a lot of emerging countries when you have good initiatives at the start, at the supply side, putting money, but it's very hard because it's much harder to actually deregulate or change the laws. Do you agree with that statement, or do I?
Yeah, I do. I think oftentimes government initiatives try to put money that is kind of in places counterintuitive to how businesses naturally need to form and how markets naturally need to grow. So that's one thing. And I think when they can put money in and then there are still huge barriers around growing a company, then it's very difficult. So to the extent that initiatives can be developed that respond naturally to the market and somehow impact those regulatory things, but those are just tough
What
things.
regulatory? Because the four of you, live in the US. Startup visa, the visa. Because the visa situation, if you ask anyone, and it's not only for the US, by the way, because other countries can actually benefit from making it easier for someone. Let's put me, I could actually come here and work for 6 months and nobody would actually make it hard for me if I actually want to bring money in the country. But the same thing applies because obviously the focus is on the US and the focus is on the Bay Area. So what about the visa situation in the US? If any one of these guys wants to come, I know a lot of Lebanese have a dual nationality, so I'm discounting this.
So, I grew up with a Lebanese passport, and I went to the United States as a student. And over there, I've experienced the whole immigration law. And then I started a company, and now I'm hiring sometimes, foreign immigrants, immigrants to the company. So the biggest challenge, honestly, in the United States, and this is probably a very important, point for the ecosystem, is immigration. In the US, you feel the system works against you as a startup or a technology company when it comes to immigration. It's really, you can get a student visa and you can go there, but then the moment you graduate, just like you're going to see that ICE is going to kick you out as if you overstay your visa for like 1 second, right? So what happened, there's no pathway. It's not easy pathway in the United States to really stay there. They created something called H-1B, but they only give it to 100,000 workers a year. And and the problem, if you look at the US alone, we have 3 million jobs, in STEM jobs, science, technology, engineering, and math, and we can't fill them up. So we really in desperate need over there for a lot of talent, engineering, science talent, but the immigration law does not support it at all. And right now, we've probably seen the news, yesterday about Obama just, trying to push the immigration law. But this is a huge problem in the U.S. And sometimes the immigration laws for talented, highly talented people or skilled worker is mixed with the illegal immigration inside the United States. And that's completely diluting the whole conversation and really hindering startups a lot.
It's the single biggest problem for the tech sector in the U.S. is being able to hire technical talent. And smart people being kicked out. Canada is taking advantage of US being really stupid about this. Canada is welcoming the best and brightest in the world, where US is kind of treating them like farm workers that they don't want. And it's a lot of political bullshit in the US that you guys probably don't understand, but there are really two, separate camps, and one, uses, anyway, I'm not gonna dive into that. But governments help. The way governments measure success doesn't 100% map with the way startups measure success, right? So government programs think, okay, we're going to build a techno park with pretty A-class buildings, and we're going to create jobs. Bullshit. Startups don't create jobs. A good startup actually eliminates jobs because it makes things much more efficient, right? So startups don't need a pretty office space. they need knowledge and capital and access to markets.
The framework, yeah.
Right? So, you know, looking at the ministers, and again, you know, I'll speak freely here, but the speeches yesterday about creating jobs and doing this and that, that's not what startups do. I think they're misunderstanding a little bit. Startups create new markets, create new opportunities, change the world, and just wait what happens to people without high education. The next 20 years, robotics is going to take over a lot of very, manual jobs all over the world.
Yeah,
It's
but
going to be a
all
wild,
the
wild
jobs
world.
that are process-based or can be divided in processes will be probably automated. But back to the immigration, big debate, and I'm not going to do politics here. But Devin, do you feel that living in San Francisco, you mentioned earlier at the very start of this conversation that, yeah, talent was extremely expensive, but at the same time, the right talent, the ones that you need when you scale, are in the Silicon Valley. But do you still feel you're lacking, and maybe in your situation, maybe in your environment, do you feel that you lack talent?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think there are lots and lots of companies that would like to hire a lot more people, and the jobs are vacant. And I think that the U.S. policy is, obviously a big country with lots of divided politics, and the argument against it, right, is that there's all these people in the U.S. that are unemployed. Like, why don't we retrain them? Which is obviously not going to happen. So there's a real burden in the U.S. even for startup companies that they're creating $100,000 bonuses if you can recruit a great employee. That and at the same time there's great engineers in the Ukraine that are making $2,000 a month very happily. Like, there's
The gray ones make about $5,000.
$5,000 a month. But there's still a giant disconnect. It's going to get the friction is going to eliminate over time. But we're in this period of time where governments move slower than startups do, and that's just the way it works right now, unfortunately.
So if I add up the fact that some people might not want to move, or rather prefer staying in other ecosystems, and the visa situation makes it hard, then what do you think about startups that try to have a limited number of people based in the Bay Area because they want to access, network, all that, right? But then actually have most of their backends, most of the operations actually set up everywhere. It can happen in Eastern Europe. It can happen. I don't know if it ever happens in Lebanon. But what do you think? Do you think it's a model that is attractive, and especially, is that a model that VCs, investors understand, or will they at some point say, guys, if you really want me to invest, bring your people here, otherwise I'm not going to invest?
Well, I think investors care about the core team, where the core team is, the CEO, COO, the people who are setting the strategy, the management. I don't think investors care about if you're outsourcing part of your technology or you have an office overseas in terms of technology, But sometimes if your business is international, they want you to be, you don't want you in the valley. They want you to have operation. But as long as the company itself in the United States have full control over the intellectual property, decision making, and strategy, and can make investors feel comfortable about it, I don't see an issue.
Yeah, but is that not an issue, because I see you seem to be agreeing, but is that an issue in terms of acquisition? Because if I acquire a company and half of it is actually not there, it's not as attractive for me to acquire a company.
I mean, that's exactly, because of acquisition, you care about acquisition. An acquirer cares about few things. They care about the intellectual property and the product itself. They care about the core team that's behind the product and that grew it. And they care on and also the market penetration and market cap. And they can get all of those with the core team and the technology being there. So I don't see an issue. So because what happens is that as long as you're not outsourcing the core of your technology, the core of the intellectual property, the core of IP. That's why, for example, Apple manufactures all their product in China. They don't do anything in.
No, the new Mac is done.
Well,
Mac Pro is done in California, apparently.
So it's the part is like what part of your company is in the U.S. What part is outside?
Well, if you're going to build a company to flip it, again, Yahoo is buying engineers at $1 million a head. Right, so if you want,
exactly, that's the price I was about to say. It's $1 million per engineer. Yeah.
I mean, and if your engineering is in Ukraine, it's going to trade at a little bit lower per head. I mean, it sounds bad, right? But it's like engineering, slave trade. But yeah, I mean,
engineering slave
the
trade.
point, engineering slave trade. Yes, please tweet that. So it's you're absolutely right. It's more about the HQ, where the strategy is, where the management is. But dirty little secret, for example, most European banks, most big British companies, all of their engineering happens in Ukraine. Ukraine, again, is a big source. Graduates as many IT workers a year as does the US, 16,000 about. with 1/6 the population. So you can see certain countries start developing a lot of very specific talents that, as the different waves and different tides of interest in venture capital and startups, between 10 and 20 years change, different regions will pop up as leaders naturally because they have these natural resources, whatever they may be. Right now, Silicon Valley is a huge resource. Before, other places were a huge resource. Silicon Valley didn't happen on accident. It was actually created because most government money went to Harvard and MIT traditionally, right? All the research money. And Stanford, from the mid-50s and beyond, actually very specifically went after, Frederick Sherman actually specifically went after that government money, and that's how it all started.
I was just about to mention the caveat is we're talking software because now we see a lot of startups doing hardware, and that, for instance, basically if you want to scale, you go to China. There's right now, you go to Shenzhen, in one day you have 10,000 units of something. I mean, this is maybe the caveat. We're almost out of time, but I want to just jump to one last thing, and then you can have closing words if you'd like. Vitaly mentioned at the very beginning of this conversation that, the rest of the world is growing, and they will need stuff, and maybe they will need the same stuff that the West has. So, are you implying that copycats are okay?
No. So, I'm not a big fan of copycats. I have a design education. I'm a designer, so intellectual property is kind of core to me, and I have this allergic reaction when I see things being copied. All you really need to copy and understand is a business model, right? You don't need to copy pixel per pixel somebody's website. There's a certain company based in Berlin that's famous for doing this. Won't mention any names, Mario. So,
but then again, sorry to interrupt, and then you can go on. Everything is a remix then again as well.
yeah, I mean, but you have to localize it too, right? So for example, Eastern Europe, credit card penetration is not as good. US, 100% credit card penetration. Western Europe, 100% credit card penetration. Logistics, right? So delivery is not as reliable. Mobile internet is not as fast. All of these things you have to localize for and you have to adjust for. And also cultural norms of how things are purchased, how certain things are used. These things are not necessarily universal. And you have to localize, and again, if I was to start from scratch and look at the highest potential area in the world, it would be Southeast Asia right now. Huge population, very young population, growing very fast, and needs everything, right? So you can go there and start very large companies that are not going to be Silicon Valley companies. They're going to be local companies that may, take some ideas from Silicon Valley, but they'll look completely different at scale than where they originally got the idea from.
I agree. I mean, you can't, I'm not a big fan of copycat for product itself, but I think if there's one thing you want to copy from the US is kind of the mindset. And the most important things probably that the US culture has is that it's okay to fail. And this is huge. I grew up here in Lebanon. It's just failure is not, it's very destructive. Over there in the US, it's okay to fail. Start your company. And if you fail, you can go and rise again and start another company. That's why statistically, if you want to go into startup, statistically, more than 90% you're going to fail. If it is not okay for you to fail in your society, chances are you're not going to actually go and create a startup. And I think that's the biggest thing that's missing here in the culture and in this country is that people need to be okay with failure and actually embrace it as mean to reach success.
I have one more minute. I will give 30 seconds to each of you because these guys have been monopolizing the discussion in the past 10. Do you have any closing words you want to add on maybe on the act of failure or as you wish?
Yeah, I think we covered an impressive number of topics during this panel, so hard to recap on any one thing. But to build on that, I mean, I would just say that in contexts like this, in talking about the U.S. startup ecosystem, I think it's important to recognize the diversity even within the US. We've said it's a huge country. And then I think the relationship between different places trying to become innovation cities and trying to become innovation ecosystems is to look at what is working in other places, the culture, certain elements, what interventions they're doing that seem to be getting traction, how companies are growing, why they're growing, and take what makes sense and look at it in the context of what you have already and how those things can interact with each other. That would be my closing thought.
Devin, you'll have
sure.
the last words.
I'll take one sort of contrarian closing thought about kind of to your point about copycats and to the point about kind of what's important about starting a company, I mean, you could go out and pay $50 on Odesk to duplicate eBay or at Facebook. It doesn't mean you have eBay or Facebook, the company. And I think what's really important when you're looking at startups, it's important to kind of go back and say, like, you actually need to have a business model that works and is rational and is profitable. I mean, I think like when you see the media and you see the press like talking about Silicon Valley startups and the ability to raise money and lose lots of money, I think it's really easy to get away from like what's important when you build a company, which is actually like building something people like and like creating value for yourself as a company and for your users. And if you do that, I mean, it doesn't matter where you are. You can be in Lebanon or the Congo or in Antarctica, as long as you kind of have all those things that work. Your business is going to work.
On that, Melissa, Devin, Vitaly, Mark, thank you. You can give them a round of applause. Thank you very much, guys.